Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Hook Rocks, the ultimate rock community podcast. Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe, and staying healthy. I know different states are doing different things right now, and the numbers still are not looking good. So hopefully at some point we can move past this and get on the road to recovery and actually see that light at the end of the tunnel. I was thinking at one point we would get there, but we haven't yet. And it's affecting a lot of things. It's affecting everybody, in the country, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's employment, whatever it is, it's having an effect on everybody. And those that love music, those that are tuning into the Hook Rocks, that love live music, it's affected you. And the fact that there's been no shows since beginning of March. So I'd like to welcome in our next guest. She is the host from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on KLOS 95.5 in Southern California. It's Marci Wiser. How you doing today, Marci? What's going on?
Hey, Jay. I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you doing this. I know, like we talked before you came on, our schedules are trying to align, and they finally did. So I'm really happy you're doing the podcast. Thank you very much.
Yeah, happy to do it. And I was just thinking it is a good time for this. We don't have live shows, but it's nice to sit back and talk rock and roll. Crazy year. What a crazy year it's been.
It has been a crazy year, and we are definitely going to get into all that. But as we do with every first-time guest who comes on the Hook Rocks, we always start with the same question, and that is the essence of the show. Just like every rock song has a hook that sucks you in, every rock fan has a moment, whether it's a song, an album, a band, or performance that hooked them on rock and roll. What was it for you?
Well, I was the youngest child in my family, and my two older brothers, my sister, they were all rock lovers. But my middle brother and I were pretty close, and he introduced me to so many bands growing up. And I just remember, sitting there in school, I was the one sitting there writing Blue Oyster Cult, BOC, all over my notebook, just all these band names. And he would introduce me to just some pretty cool stuff. Paper Lace, The Night Chicago Died. I think I wore that album out.
That's interesting, because I had an older brother who was 4 years older than me who would bring a lot of rock music into the house. And I was, as early as 6 years old. I remember hearing Journey Escape, and I remember hearing Eruption for the first time when I was 7 or 8 years old. So I was like this little kid rocker in the neighborhood because my brother was 4 years older than me. So, I'd come to school with my Walkman, listening to Van Halen or, Motley Crue or whoever it was. And, everyone else in the class is listening to Men at Work and Duran Duran and Cyndi Lauper. And not that, to each their own. But I was always like, and then it was like a few years later where everyone kind of caught up to me, when rock kind of had its heyday in the mid to late 80s and into the early 90s. Everybody was like, oh, have you heard of this band? I'm like, yeah, I've been listening to them for a few years now.
I knew them before they were cool.
Yeah, I was like this, 11-year-old old fart, like everybody would come to me with like, have you heard of this, man? I'm like, yeah, I've got like 2 other albums already,
Oh my gosh. When I was 11, I dressed up as Paul Stanley for Halloween.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's what I was. And actually, I was talking to Paul Stanley. I had interviewed him a while ago, and I had to show him the pictures.
That's great. That's great. Life comes, full circle. Like I interviewed George Lynch back in January, and all I kept thinking about for like the first 10 minutes was my brother played guitar, and I heard the song Kiss of Death over and over and over again while sitting on the couch watching MTV. And I'm like, life comes full circle sometimes, Like,
it really, really does, yeah.
So you have been, around rock music now for a while. How long have you been, on KLOS?
It is going on. It'll be 6 years in March.
Okay. And before that, you did some college radio, right? And you moved around. You were in Seattle and some other places.
Yeah. So that's where I got my start was in college. I was getting some college credit, and actually, I was thinking about going into journalism, but I was working at the college radio station. This is decades ago. We won't talk about. But I was getting college credit, and a music director for one of the radio stations happened to be driving through and heard me. And he called me and he said, "Hey, would you like a job?" And it was almost as if, this career picked me in a weird way. And I'm grateful it did, because I couldn't ask for a more fun career, that's for sure.
Yeah, doing what you love and getting paid for it sometimes doesn't feel like work at all,
Yeah, exactly. I jumped around. I was at KUPD, and I was at KLOS in New York, and I was at Globe in DC. And it's sometimes when you're in this business, you have to be willing to jump around a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's really is the history of a lot of people in your profession, where they start, where they grow. I mean, it's not necessarily where they finish.
Yep, right.
So being around rock and roll, is for the past 6 years with KLOS and before that, you've seen a lot of different things, right? You've interviewed a lot of different artists. You are familiar with the hurdles that rock and roll is facing, has been facing. I mean, last year when we talked about the state of rock and roll as of 2019, we were really focused on the relevancy of rock music. We were focusing on how companies that are advertising for the Super Bowl. I remember Dee Snider had this big post on Twitter and social media about how, why there's no rock music in the Super Bowl at halftime. And
wanted AC/DC to play.
Yeah, he's even started a petition, but that comes from the advertisers, right? I mean, they don't want to spend all that money at halftime on Super Bowl to people who are going to tune it out, because rock really hasn't done much over the last decade and a half in terms of, pulling in a younger audience, basically developing the younger talent like country music does. So there's a really big gap from the big fish, the Metallicas, the Guns N' Roses, the Foo Fighters, that can weather the storm like a pandemic now, or weather the storm of rock music becoming irrelevant, because classic rock fans will still go see them. They'll still go buy the tickets to go see them in concert on tour. But it's the younger bands or the bands that play those mid-level theaters, the small theaters, the clubs, that are really suffering, because it's hard to get a classic rock fan to listen to new music. It's hard for them to connect to the younger generation, which I do think is changing. I do see that. Yeah. I have a 15-year-old son who, loves rock music, loves the new bands and listens to them, but they're not adapting, or rock and roll never really adapted like hip hop or pop music did with social media and singles and however they get their music out now these days. And it's really affecting what's happening. Now you add in the pandemic, and you see all these shows being canceled, and you see tours moving to 2021. You see clubs.
And hopefully then,
Yeah, we don't even know that. And you see the small clubs, the small theaters struggling to survive because they're not bringing any money in. So where to begin in 2020 on the state of rock and roll? The present day, the pandemic, and how it's affecting rock music. What are you seeing? What do you feel is happening as this COVID-19 virus keeps going?
I feel so bad for the bands that were just starting to gain traction. You got like Dirty Honey and Rival Sons. They're big in their own right. Not so much in the United States yet. They've got strong following, but I feel so bad. And Dirty Honey, I mean, they're an incredible band, and they had all these plans. They're supposed to be in Australia right now recording with Nick Davia, and it's just all of that was ruined because of this pandemic. And they'll be fine. We're going through this. I think rock as a whole could use more support. One thing that really irks me, the award shows, and I hope it changes, but they really need to show rock more love. The Grammys, they rarely do, and that's really frustrating. And labels, yeah, you're right. Going back to what you said, I think they need to take the time to develop young rock bands, and maybe younger bands need to be more open to developmental deals, because rather than a one and done strategy. And I think that's kind of been the case.
Well, the one and done started really, if you go back to the late 80s, when all these bands became popular in the early to mid 80s, like your Motley Crues and your Poisons and your Guns N' Roses. So, of course, record labels want to find the next Motley Crue, the next Poison, the next Guns N' Roses. And if you're not connecting with an audience by your first or second single, they're already moving on.
Yeah.
Because they want to.
Yeah, yeah, sorry. Rock needs to be fun again. That's it. Because I think for a while it got really dark, borderline angry. And not to say I don't love my metal. So I do. But I think that puts out a lot of the girls, the women, and the sex, drugs, rock and roll party vibe is gone. And that all sounds to be fun. But, when rock is at its peak, that was definitely part of it. Guys, girls, they were all having a good time. Arenas were filled, and we're still filling those arenas with the classic bands. But yeah, I think it needs to be fun again and appeal to. And I love, my daughter's 16 and her playlist rocks. You were mentioning your 15-year-old son, but they, classic rock is timeless. We got the great classic rock bands. That's timeless. Younger kids always discovering that. But it's cool and it's awesome when these younger kids, you see them discover these new rock bands, and that's what it takes. That's what we need.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty of great new music out there. One of the bands my son is really into is this band South of Eden, that's from Columbus, Ohio, that used to be called Black Coffee. He's really into them, and he even said to me last week when after they released their first single, he's like, "Dad, they got like that fun rock vibe, that not a lot of bands have, like a good time party band, where it's not too serious and it's not, too dark, like you mentioned." And I think he's right on that, and I've mentioned that the world needs the rock star again. If rock and roll wants to come back, they need to have those identifying personalities that connect with that younger audience, like the David Lee Roths, like the Tommy Lees, like the, anyone you can think of from that era, Axl Rose or Slash or whoever. And there's just not. And I think people equate being a rock star with, cooking up a spoon and, shooting heroin.
Yeah, right.
You don't have to do that, to be a rock star. You just say what's on your mind. Everyone's afraid of alienating half their audience now because it's so polarizing, and it's just it's difficult for a newer rock band to kind of really be their own personality, be their own person. And I've always said, if a PR person is telling you what to say, instead of after you say something, okay, how do we deal with that? You've got the wrong PR person. PR person should manage your personality, but not confine you.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
So it's I interviewed Tuck Smith, who used to be in the Biters, who's got his new band now, and they were supposed to be the opening act on the stadium tour with Motley Crue, Def Leppard, Poison, Joan Jett, and he's on the new Nikki Sixx label with Alan Kovac, Nikki Sixx, the manager of Motley Crue. And he mentioned what you said about developing. Like, we talked about in the interview how, the record label is focused more on developing the artist rather than just turning out single after single and hopefully, if you throw enough at the wall, something will stick. So that's great to hear. Yeah. And I hope other labels, newer labels that start coming up, start doing that, because that's really important too, as you mentioned.
Yeah, it really is. I love it. I mean, we hear, it's funny, the boss at KLOS is always saying, that next really big rock star, I think it's going to be a female. I think it's going to be, the Joan Jett of today, that type of thing. When I talked to Taylor Momsen, I think I'm with her on that. She's like, I don't care if it's male or female, it's all about the song and it's all about the substance. The Pretty Reckless, I'm glad they're back at it because they were quiet, understandably so. She was really, she was shook up after Chris Cornell's death. A lot of us were, and was it Cato, their manager? Cato, yeah, and they lost him at the same time. Anyway, we got Death by Rock and Roll. We've got Aaron Jones, Take Me Away, Seattle Boy. He's incredible. You got The Who with Jacoby Shaddix and Papa Roach. That's a great tune. There's some new rock, Ozzy's new record is great start to finish. He's obviously not a new artist, but the new rock is good. Bush, The Kingdom, Corey Taylor's new stuff. I think Corey Taylor's voice, he hands down one of the best voices in rock and roll. I'm a huge Corey Taylor fan. Black Eyes Blue he nailed it. Volbeat is awesome. I'm really excited. About this new music.
I am too. There's and a lot of it was kind of right underneath the surface, right before the pandemic hit. And I've interviewed newer bands who are ready to charge through, and ready to really have a big 2020 into 2021. And, there's so many bands from the UK. Whether it's Massive Wagons, whether it's Doomsday Outlaw, whether it's Guerrilla Riot. All these bands that are just, coming through and not, unfortunately, a lot of the bands from the UK or Europe don't really get a chance to tour America because of the expense and how difficult it is to line up because promoters want that for sure thing. I also feel sometimes too that a lot of the classic rock bands that tour, there are some that do, but I think some of them need to do more in terms of bringing a younger act with them to get exposure, to have them, that audience hear that. And I know a lot of it has to do with the promoter and wanting to get that money and that guarantee by adding these packages. I mean, you saw, like we just talked about, the stadium tour. A lot of the reasons why all those bands were on that tour was because they had to bring in as many people as possible to pay off what all those guys wanted, especially I think Crew and Def Leppard were asking, $3 million per show.
Yeah.
That's why that stuff happens. I'm glad Tuck Smith and his band was able to get that opening slot, but I want to see more of that because that's what used to happen when I was growing up when tours would come through Chicago.
Bring in the newer stuff with them.
Yeah, bring in the new acts and bring in the new openers that, were just having a new record, just had a new single. I remember Rat bringing Bon Jovi, when Bon Jovi just had their second album out. I remember, I remember Doc and it was Judas Priest bringing Cinderella, which was a great tour. But there was so much of that. And now I just think because obviously money rules everything, you don't get the newer act being included on these tours unless you have another opener in between them and the main act.
Also, I think some of these classical rock great. I love what Ozzy's doing, and I love to see kind of mix it up. And he's now working with Andrew Watt. I think that's been really good for him. And but I love the Post Malone collaboration. And there were so many young people when they first heard "Take What You Want" is that the name of the song? They first heard that, and they were like, "Wow, who's this? We know that's Post Malone, but who's that other guy? That Ozzy? He's going to be big one day, Like, what?
I saw that too. I'm like reading that, and I'm like, who are these people that don't know who Ozzy Osbourne is? I mean, like, just maybe not even his music, but just from the show,
right.
But I think that does matter a lot, and I think that ties in with the rock star, and I think there are frontmen that are capable of being that way, like we mentioned Dirty Honey. There's the band, Joyous Wolf, who Nick Reese is the front man, who's got a great vibe about him. And he's got, he's really, I mean, if you've seen him on stage, he's just, you can't take your eyes off of him. And I think there's others that can do that. I mean, the guy from the Struts, Luke Spiller. I mean,
I've
seen him in concert. He's got the crowd at the palm of his hand.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's you got to have the talent. It's the swagger. You got to have the attitude. I mean, that's all part of rock and roll. You don't want to lose that. And I think that was kind of lost for a while.
Right.
But I think it's coming back. And there's, Violet Saturn. I don't know if you've heard of them. We discovered a couple local bands here in Southern California, all teenagers. That and then they've got some incredible songs. We've been supporting them, and they're actually both going to be announcing record deals really soon. Violet Saturn and Slave to Humanity.
There's another band out in Long Beach called Of Limbo that
nice. Okay.
is really, really good. And they kind of came from the same area that Joyous Wolf came from. They're both from Long Beach, and both bands are just incredible. I've done a lot of new music spotlights that kind of bring in these new bands and have them talk about themselves, and whether they're from New Zealand or Long Beach. It's great to hear that rock music does have these younger kids, you want to call them. I mean, they're in their early 20s, making music and being enthused about it and wanting to play for people. I mean, that's really important, because there is that element out there that says rock and roll is dead. And maybe in terms of relevancy right now, it's dead. But, when you think about all the new acts coming out, you mentioned Rival Sons, who really are finally starting to penetrate mainstream after 10 years. When you really think about it, I mean, they've been around for a while, and they're an incredible live act. They're an incredible band. Jay Buchanan's got an incredible voice. The whole band is incredible. And it's just a shame that young kids, it's not hitting them yet, and I think it's slowly hitting them, but it's just, it's maybe this pandemic, and with all the e-learning happening and being cooped up inside, creates that angst that you need for rock to survive. You know what I mean?
You gotta have the angst. Something I've noticed, there seems to be a lot more crossover. Have you noticed that? Country, the rap, rock, mixed with EDM. I mean, there's a lot of that, it seems like, lately too.
Well, one of the things that country music does is they always take their legacy artists and they always pair them up with a newer artist. So, they've got their own music channel. They've got, every market has like 2 or 3 country music stations. And, they do that. They do have, whether it's, I can't think of a, legacy, like whoever, I can't think of a legacy country music artist right now, but,
You're like me. I got to brush up on my country.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like, like what, I don't know, Garth Brooks, legacy artist, may appear on an album, of a younger country star, or appear in a video, or whatever, kind of similar to what Post Malone did with Ozzy, except Post Malone's already, huge. But that needs to happen. A lot of that crossover needs to happen. I mean, having an identifiable rock star who all the classic rock fans know, appearing in a video for whomever, I think that's important. I think, because classic rock fans think that nothing worth listening to, has happened since 1993, So, right. I mean, like, they think rock music stopped in 1992 or 1993, and everything else after that is crap.
Yeah. Hell no.
Yeah.
We're getting back to it.
And it's so important. And I've always said too, if you're a classic rock fan, how do you, it's like the parents turning the back on their children, like this music gave you so much joy in your youth. You got to support, and everyone's like, oh, these new bands suck. They don't. Not everybody should be compared to Led Zeppelin, and not everybody should be compared to Guns N' Roses. It's not fair to them. For them,
I feel bad for Greta Van Fleet with the whole Zeppelin thing. You just brought that up. I just, they're such a young band. They're obviously very talented, and and they're so sick of the Led Zeppelin comparisons. But come on, they're a young band. They're coming into their own, and I know they're working with a different producer this time. So I'm anxious to hear their new album and see what they can do. That they'll I think they'll find their way. I've heard a lot of things. It's like, no, you got to give them a chance.
What really upsets me about the whole Greta Van Fleet pushback is, for years, people have been hungry for blues-based rock, and Greta Van Fleet is blues-based rock. And here we are building them up, and now we're starting to tear them down. And I don't get that at all. You know, it's like,
I don't either.
How many rock stars like Alex Lifeson have said in interviews, let them develop their own sound. You know, when we were beginning as Rush, we were called the Canadian Led Zeppelin. And, you know, we developed and we became nothing like Led Zeppelin. So why don't we do that? Like, why? I don't understand how people can be saying, oh, there's no new rock. We need blues-based rock. And then they get all excited about Greta Van Fleet. And then 6 months later, they're back to, oh, they suck. They're a Zeppelin ripoff.
Yeah, it's because one person says it, and then everybody jumps on the bandwagon. It's kind of like I feel that way about Nickelback. I'm bringing Nickelback up here. You know, they're an incredibly talented, incredible band, Nickelback. These haters, you know, it's because they're a little crossover pop, and rock fans say, oh, I can't like that. That's not cool. They're incredible. And by the way, have you heard the Devil Went Down to Georgia cover?
I have not yet.
It is incredible. It is so good. And I actually opened up my phone today and I said, all right, you know what? If you're a Nickelback hater, I want to hear from you. How can you possibly hate this cover? If you do, call me. And I would say out of many calls, I probably had 2 negative calls.
What do you see, you know, when you're interviewing the people that you have on your show? You know, do they ever talk about what's happening with rock music in terms of the state of its relevancy and the newer acts that are coming up? I mean, do you ever get them to, you know, open up about their concern about what's happening, or do you ever touch on that subject?
I do. I asked that a lot of them, and it's interesting because I mean, there's a lot of these classic rockers. They don't look into new rock at all. Joe Elliott is a really good example. I asked him, are there any new bands that you're kind of checking out that you're, you know, no, it's not my job. You know, Paul Stanley, that's not my job. Somebody else can discover that. You know, but that's part of it. It would be nice to see support from the classic space. You know, reaching out a hand and helping out, you know, some of these younger bands. Because that's important. I mean, we need it for the genre.
We definitely do. You know, I mean, that's disappointing that he feels that way, because I can assure you when they were breaking during the new wave of British heavy metal movement, you know, one of the reasons why they broke America was the support of some of the acts here. You know, I mean, they got put on tours. I mean, they got you know, to play in front of people that, you know, if people had that mentality, they probably never would have maybe had the opportunities they had. And I know he's talked about the Struts, and I know he's talked about, you know, Greta Van Fleet. And I do agree with him that Greta Van Fleet should embrace the Zeppelin comparison instead of trying to run away from it. So I do agree with him there. But knowing all the bands in the UK that are just incredible, you know, it's disappointing that he feels that way, because I think there's a lot of artists out there that are, you know, waiting for, you know, an artist like Def Leppard to take him on tour, or an artist like, you know, Judas Priest to take him on tour, or Maiden, or, you know, those things. I mean, when I saw Judas Priest, you know, they were playing with Saxon, you know, and then the last time they came around, they were playing with oh God, who sings the song "Stealin'"?
Uriah Heep.
Yes. So, you know, Judas Priest comes with Uriah Heep. Uriah Heep is not going to help Judas Priest sell more tickets. Okay? Maybe a couple percent, you know, like 2-3%, you know, are diehard Uriah Heep fans. But Priest is, you know, fan base is very rabid, and they're very supportive of what they do. They're going to come out no matter if it's Uriah Heep or if it's some band that they've never heard of. You know, they're not going to stay home when Priest comes to town and go, I've never heard of the opening act, I'm not going to go see Judas Priest. No way. It's not going to happen.
Right.
You know, so why not use that to, you know, their advantage of bringing another young act out on the road with them and helping them get exposure? I mean, Yeah, I don't.
I think that is key. I think that is so key. And actually, um, sorry, going back to um, some of these that I've asked that question to. Lita Ford, I did, and she is 100% open. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, they need to be. I know I've seen Duff interviewed, and he was saying that there's not a lot of innovation, with the bands out there, and there's really, and I disagree with that. I mean, I don't know if you really need to have innovation or something new to be good and be successful. A lot of these bands, that came out in the early '80s and in the mid '80s were not, doing something incredibly new. I mean, they may have the image may be different than what was before, but Motley Crue had their influences, and they sounded different, but they weren't like, breaking any new, component of rock music that didn't exist before. I think they were, I think they were just going to the edge more than the previous band that went to the edge, which maybe is Van Halen, if you want to say that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's ever, I think back, I mean, there's only a handful of bands that really were innovative, that set the tone for the rest that came after them. A lot of them came in the late 60s, early 70s. There was some stuff in the late 70s, like with Van Halen, like I mentioned. But, I don't know if anything, when I heard Def Leppard in the 80s or I heard Guns N' Roses, I thought to myself, I've never heard anything like that before. It was just, for me, it was just kind of a continuation of what they were being influenced by. I don't know. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah. No, I do. And I mean, I don't think that's necessary. I mean, I think that it's the stuff that we've been lacking, and why mess with something that's not broken? It just hasn't been, like you mentioned the strut. I love his swagger. You got to have the vibe, and you got to have there's a formula. There's a formula that works, and we just need more. And by the way, I don't know if you are you a TikTok fan?
I've heard of it. I haven't really gotten too into it.
It might be addicting.
I've heard it is.
It's a little bit addicting, but I've noticed that there are a lot of younger more and more teens learning guitar, at least it seems, and drums. I'm seeing a lot of this, especially on TikTok, and that's exciting because there might be a lot more, young rock bands on the horizon. Maybe an explosion coming, and I'm already seeing it, and I'm getting excited about it. But there's a formula. There's a formula that works.
Yeah.
Not that you can't, do something different, and yeah, what is that? It's going to switch it up a little bit, of course, but there's a formula that works.
There definitely is. I mean, I saw the Struts up in Wisconsin, 2 years ago, and it was a 200 capacity club, small theater, and they were phenomenal. They had everybody into them for an hour and a half, and Luke Spiller was just like you said. He had that swagger. He had the crowd in the palm of his hand, and I looked at my friend and I go, "That's a rock star. That's a rock star right there." And, I don't know why rock continues to be muffled. I mean, you mentioned, the award shows. They don't even show the rock awards anymore on television. You have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame telling you now what the spirit of rock and roll is, with, Notorious B.I.G. getting, elected to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's just, it's almost like it's being taken away from us right before our eyes. And I think we have spurts of people getting upset about, like everybody gets upset when those Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominees are announced, and then it dies down. And then, you have people on my Twitter feed or Facebook saying, "Oh, I haven't listened to anything new in so long," and I'm just like, well, don't you read the posts that I have and the bands that I post on my Facebook or Twitter? I mean, just click play, just listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, we have to kind of take it back, put it in our own hands, or we take control, I guess.
Now, when you think of a pandemic, though, and you think of the future of live music and how it's ripping apart the small clubs, I mean, I just had custom guitar maker, Mike from Hermosa Beach, on the show this past week. And Hermosa has that venue, St. Rock's, that is up for sale. We've heard the Troubadour struggling to survive. Is there going to be enough clubs to support these younger acts, or these, acts like your LA Guns and your Wingers that play these smaller theaters, these, mid-level theaters? Are there going to be enough of those to support the bands that want to tour in the future? That's a huge issue right now.
It's a huge issue. It's really concerning. There's and I like that some of these bands are doing these live streams and kind of experimenting with the buy a ticket and watch the live stream event, and that's really cool. And there's a band, a big name band, and I'm not going to say who it is, but they had the opportunity to do it at a club, local club, but didn't want to because they didn't want any of the money going towards the club. And I was so disappointed because I was just thinking, how do you expect these clubs to survive right now? They're not going to. They can't.
That's disappointing to hear. It's a really big issue. Because I think of all the stuff that's been canceled, and I usually go to the smaller theaters. I usually go to the clubs or the theaters. I'm kind of past the point of going to these football stadiums and these basketball stadiums, or wherever they play, because it's just so big and there's so many people, and unless you're really up front, you can't even see what they look like. I mean, I took my son to see Metallica, 3 years ago, at Soldier Field, where the Chicago Bears play, and I thought I got good seats, right? Like I looked at the thing where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get seats right there because that shouldn't be that bad. And I got there, and I was watching screens all night, and I'm like, this is not enjoyable to me, And
you have to be willing to pull a Dave Grohl. He was at the Metallica show at the Rose Bowl, and he was down in the mosh pit with everyone, and I just love that man.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. I mean, and you mentioned, someone carrying the flag for rock music, as these bands go away because of age and father time, Foo Fighters is really the one band that's going to be able to play stadiums, play, your football stadiums and your big amphitheaters and whatnot. So, and he's such a great guy. He's such a nice guy too. And he's a great ambassador for rock and roll. And, he's taken the Struts out on tour, and he does a lot to, bring in newer acts as well. So I always appreciate that. I mean, Taylor Hawkins has his solo album, and, he's playing these festivals and parks in Southern California, which I think is really cool. But there's not enough of those guys doing that. And during this pandemic, we've got the Save Our Stages, organization that's trying to raise money for these clubs all over. But, I feel like I'm not going to have a place to go see these bands when this is all over, because I do enjoy the smaller venues.
I do too. There's nothing like an intimate venue when you're there watching a show, the experience of that. And I'm really worried too. And I would like to see, more bands support, and not to say that bands aren't supporting, but I was just disappointed, when and right now it's kind of like this is so new. None of us have experienced a pandemic in our lifetime. Most of us, very few. But I don't know. I mean, it's all experimental. We'll see how this goes down. But I would like to see the support for these smaller venues. They need it.
When you think about the future of rock and roll, what do you think is the biggest obstacle
for rock and roll?
Yes.
That's a good question. The biggest obstacle, support. Not having the support that they need.
Are you talking in terms of fans? Are you talking in terms of the bigger fish in the game?
Both, all of it. I'm talking all of it, all the way around. I think they need the bigger fish. They need that support. They need support from radio stations. They need support from fans. They need support from labels.
Why do you think, being in radio, why do you think it's hard for rock stations to survive in markets all over the country?
Here's what I found, and I have been extremely lucky in my career in radio. For the most part, I've had the autonomy, to do. I've been able to do what I want to do, and that's not always the case. Probably in a lot of cases, and I've been very lucky. And so, if I'm passionate about something, if I want to play it, I'm going to play it, and that is a rare. That's a rare thing. You don't see that anymore. Everything is just, you got the schedule. You play what you're told to play. I think jocks need to have the freedom, and so that they can express, because people can pick up on your passion. People can feel that. If you love something, they're going to be like, "Wow, okay, I need to give it a chance." Otherwise, it's all right. I heard this song last hour. What good is that going to do? I mean, the whole thing about radio, you have to appeal to the community. It's I look at it as an extended family. And it's important. Local radio is very important, otherwise you lose it. You just can't, you got to have some of that. It's just more personable. It's not, a Spotify playlist, but yeah, I mean, you've got to have passion from the jock. You've got to give a jock the freedom to play what they're excited about. That's going back to the old school DJing. I feel really strongly about that. And I've been very lucky.
When I think
I'm
back,
happy to support.
When I think back of, the rock radio stations that I used to listen to, they did have the DJ personalities, and they were allowed to play what they wanted, which was great.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember listening to old stations like WMET in Chicago and hearing Judas Priest into Dokken, into the Greg Kihn Band, into Van Halen. It was awesome. It was great. And that went away. And is it, when you think of radio now, because I traveled in the fall to Colorado with my son, and got in the rental car, was trying to find a rock station, found a classic rock station, and it was like they played, and I had it on the whole time, every time we got in the car when we were there. And it was like the same cycle of songs. I think they only had like 50 songs in their rotation, or 100 songs, or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I remember hearing Back in Black by AC/DC twice in a 4-hour period. And I think it gets so watered down that it's, there's nothing new, unless you're in like a college radio station where they can play new rock and, new artists, and they're kind of have that freedom to do that. You're really not getting much. And I think people get frustrated with that. Like, where's the deep cuts from Aerosmith, or where's the deep cuts from Van Halen or Led Zeppelin? And they just play the same formula over and over again. And I think that takes a part too. Like, it doesn't have the, rock doesn't really have the infrastructure. And I've talked about this before, to really succeed at this point. They don't. When it comes to radio, you have to. So it's interesting because there's a fine line. You want to play, and the masses are not musicologists. They don't go deep. They don't know the deep cuts. You don't want people to tune out. So it's a fine line. That's why you want to play the familiar stuff. People, they get in the car and turn the radio on for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then they're out. And then, you want to play the familiar stuff. That's the fine line, though. That's where you can get a little too repetitive. You want people to be able to get in the car and sing along with something they know. However, there's a balance, and and I guess where I have that outlet, I've got a feature during my show that allows me to just play whatever the hell I want. Rick James, cool. I'm throwing it on. Somebody requested it. It fits. I'm going to throw it out. Just you got to have some of that. You've got to have an outlet, but it's a balance. It's a balancing game. Do you feel that rock hasn't adapted to connecting with the younger audience with technology. You know, every kid now has a cell phone. They have access to music. I know my son listens to rock music, so he's not part of the problem. But I feel sometimes where, you know, compared to like hip hop or pop music or even country, where rock is kind of behind, because we all know and we all remember those experiences of buying an album, and
Right.
you had the album cover, and that was always a big thing. And then you had the liner notes, and it was like an experience. Rock and roll really was an experience. I don't know if that experience was shared in pop music or with hip hop or with country, where, you know, that whole, I mean, like you would sit with an album for like a week or a few weeks, you know, you would just listen to it over and over again. And now with the attention span of the younger generation being very short and very quick, I mean, what's released on Friday is irrelevant by Monday.
Right.
You know, I think that also is a huge thing. I don't think rock has figured out a way to connect with that younger audience. And I go back to earlier in our conversation about the rock star. And I think, you know, hip hop has embraced the rock star lifestyle.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, they're, you know,
Definitely.
I mean, it's not rock music, but they have embraced, you know, the you know, the bling and the
lifestyle. Yeah.
the lifestyle,
100%.
all that stuff. And I don't know why rock stopped doing that. I don't know why. Like, tell me one new band or one band, you know, that now has that type of fun party time, Van Halen-ish. I mean, when you remember Van Halen when they came on, I mean, it was like, dude, who are these guys? Like, David Lee Roth was like one of the most electrifying people to watch growing up.
Well, David Lee Roth is one in his own. I mean, you know,
Sure.
he's an amazing.
But even Axl Rose, you know, I mean,
Right.
even Steven Tyler, you know, I mean, it was just like the rock star. They had that aura around them. I remember, was it Martha Quinn from MTV said one time in an interview, no matter what question you asked David Lee Roth, he was going to answer with what he wanted to say. It didn't matter. Yep. And where is that? Why did rock stop that? I don't get it.
So I think part of that is learning. I think it goes back to taking the time to develop these young rock bands. You know, I think of Dirty Honey. Mark Lavelle, if you're listening, I'm throwing this out there, but it's true. They're a very, you know, they're a younger new band breaking through right now, and I love Mark. I love Mark on stage. He's got the swagger. I love every single one of them. They can bring it. If you've seen them live, you know that they can bring it, and it's just very exciting. So I see just a solid future for Dirty Honey. But I saw Mark really early on, and then I see him now, and he's become that rock star. Does that make sense? Like it takes time, and you have to say it's an attitude. And it's really nice to see, but it takes time. And labels, as good luck as labels do, they need to take the time to develop these young rock bands.
But when I think of, like, you know, because I've talked to Mark too. Mark, great dude, awesome voice, like you said, he's got the swagger. But what frustrates me is you have a new hip hop act that has a video that goes right into that lifestyle. It goes right into, you know, what, you know, I mean, hip hop to me, in terms of the presentation, is a lot like, you know, the quote unquote hair band era of the glam era of the late 80s into the early 90s, where it became very formula. It became pretty much the same thing. I mean, every videos were so similar. A lot of it was filmed on the same stages, so you could say, oh yeah, I think, didn't Poison just have a video like that? Yeah. And hip hop does that, whereas rock, I don't know. It just like it, you know, you said developing, and I agree with you. I mean, I think labels need to develop the artist, but I also think they need to be rock stars. I also think they can't be confined to playing it safe. And I think a lot of bands, whether it's their PR, whether it's the label, whether it's their management, play it safe too much. Be the rock star.
Everybody has to be politically correct these days. Everybody is so sensitive. Everyone is too overly sensitive, and it's going to take It's going to take that rock star with enough confidence to just break that and say, no, that's what it is. That's what it is.
I think of what you just said. Everybody's so sensitive. Everybody's quick to do the boycott thing. If they don't like something that someone says or hears, people forget that if they don't like what they hear, they can turn it off. They can change the station. I think of Ted Nugent, and I think of his music.
Yeah.
I don't agree with anything Ted Nugent says at all, ever. But I still love Stranglehold. I still love, Free for All. I still love, his music. And I'm not going to stop listening to Ted Nugent and take that joy away from me that I've enjoyed for so many years. So what if I don't agree with anything he says? I still like his music.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's always been those who have said, oh, why is that? Why are they getting involved in politics and why, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to turn them off and never going to listen. But you're right. I mean, when you love the music, you love the music. And it's a free country. People have the right to speak their mind, and we should all be tolerant of opinions, period. I'm so tired of the politics. I'm so tired of it. But, we live in a great country where we can speak our mind. We can. So doesn't mean you don't have to hate the music because of an artist's opinion.
I 100% agree. George Lynch is another example. George Lynch really walks the walk when it comes to his activism. He does a lot with the homeless in LA. He does a lot with Native Americans. He was involved in the protest with the pipeline that was being built through the Dakotas. He was there. He was there when they had the hoses out and they were spraying the people and everything. And I hate when people use the term "stay in your lane." Rock music has always been counterculture. It's always been the middle finger. You look back at the 60s with the protest about the Vietnam War. You look at Woodstock, which is probably the biggest event in rock and roll history. You look at all those bands that were on the bill, all had protest songs. People look at me with their deer in the headlights when I tell them that War Pigs by Black Sabbath is a protest song. It's anti-military, and they're like, I didn't know that. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, so, but you've been enjoying Black Sabbath music for decades. So why should you stop? Right.
Music is all in the translation, right? It's all about, and I think most artists want you to hear it how you want to hear it.
Sure. I agree with that. Yeah. There's always the interpretation of the fan that, makes, right. But there are certain subjects though where you say, well, yeah, this is definitely a protest song. You know what I mean? So
this is obviously about that. Yeah.
Yeah. But so rock and roll has always been about that. I remember when people were walking out of Roger Waters' concert, 3-4 years ago because they didn't like the political subject matter. Yeah. You spent how much money on Roger Waters and you did not know that?
Right.
You did not know his history and how he's, very political. How did you not know that?
It was like my coworker was talking about someone who was complaining about punk music, saying, "Could you just leave the politics out, please?" And it's like, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but punk music is usually political.
Very political.
Thing.
But, I get upset when I did something on my Twitter a few months ago with Bon Jovi, and there were responses, oh, he's a liberal. Well, so what? So what? His music's still good. Ted Nugent is a conservative. I still love his music. Whether it's Nikki Sixx or whoever is saying whatever, you don't have to agree with somebody to enjoy it. And I think that plays into a lot of what's been happening because there are people that are afraid of alienating 50% of their audience. And I understand that if they're a new band, that's huge for them. They don't want to do that. But at the same time, you may alienate the people in my demographic, but you may connect with all of the younger generation who's like, ooh, who's this guy with all this controversy? Because when you're controversial, younger kids want to listen to you. When the parents say don't listen, they want to listen. It's always been that way.
Yep, always, yep.
My son just watched The Dirt, a few months ago. He is
really?
Yeah. Yeah, I did not know that was happening. But
hey, my daughter did too, and I didn't know either. So we're in the same boat.
Yeah, he's like, I'm like, have you seen The Dirt? He's like, yeah, multiple times. I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah, especially that opening scene. That's fun.
Yeah, that's immediately what I thought about. I'm like, so he's seen that several times. So, but
Oh,
but him and his friends who've all seen it are huge Motley Crue fans. I mean, if you
mm-hmm.
want to look at a prime example of how to connect with the younger generation, Forbes magazine did
throw Machine Gun Kelly in the movie.
absolutely, and throw him in the song that's the most popular song you've released in 20 years.
Yeah.
Forbes magazine did an article about Motley Crue where prior to The Dirt, their demographic of people who bought their music and their tickets and their merchandise was like 31 to 50. After the movie, it was the biggest demographic was 18 to 25.
Yeah. And they're going, God, I missed out on this. The 80s, they must have been pretty cool. Yeah.
And you watch that movie, right? Because we've all seen it. And it is, it shows a lot of things that are not politically correct now. And it connected with the younger audience. I mean, it's become like the Fast Times at Ridgemont High of their generation.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
So, when I say the rock star thing or when you and I talk about it, I mean, there's some truth to that. There's some validity to that if you're a little bit controversial and your parents don't want you to listen to it, kids will find a way. I remember smuggling Ozzy Osbourne albums into my house, Iron Maiden albums into my house, So that's a huge, huge thing. But I still think, moving forward, the biggest thing is the obstacles created by this pandemic. What the state of rock and roll was in going into 2020 is now faced with a bigger hurdle in 2021 because of where are these bands going to play? Are these clubs going to be able to survive?
I guess the silver lining here is we're going to see some creativity. You've got to get creative. You've got to think out of the box. We've got these drive-in concerts starting to happen, the live streams. And that's all we can do right now.
Right.
But we have to get as creative as possible. We'll get through it.
Yeah, no, I do think we will get through it. I just don't know what it's going to look like when we do. How decimated are these small clubs going to be? Will it take markets completely out of tours? If there's one club in Lincoln, Nebraska, is a band not going to be able to tour there because that one club shut down? So
right.
Those are the things that that we need to think about. When you hear the Troubadour might be closing, I'm like, I can't believe that could happen.
No, I know. It's so disturbing. Because it's a problem and it's very scary. You've got the movie theaters faced with the same thing. Here's the thing though. So now we can watch these movies in our own home. So, for me personally, I don't think that's the same thing. You don't get the movie experience. You're not going to the theater, getting the popcorn, picking your seat, and that's a whole experience.
I agree.
It's not the same as hanging out on your couch, but and neither is watching a live stream event. It's pretty cool, and it's still cool, and it's the next best thing at this point. But you're missing out on that experience for sure.
Absolutely. I took my son to see the Rink of Tours last summer, and we walked out of that show, and he was floored. He was like, they were incredible. They didn't allow cell phones, so you had to put them in those packets or those pockets that they have, so you couldn't use your cell phone. So everybody was into the show. The theater was incredibly, insanely hot. You were just sweating, just standing still. And, they come on, they just blew the doors off the place, and my son was in awe. And you can't get that on a live stream. You can't. No,
you can't. You can't. Yeah, I'm worried about that too. I'm really worried about that too. I'm worried about losing these clubs. They need support.
And on the other flip side of it is the bands. Are the bands? I interviewed Eddie Spaghetti from the Super Suckers. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but
no, I'm not.
Oh, Super Suckers have been around for a long time, and they play small clubs. And if you like the Motorhead vibe, you'll definitely like Super Suckers.
Excellent. Okay.
So, I've seen them, 10 plus times over the years. And, I'm talking to him about the pandemic, and he's like, this could be the end of the road for us because, if this doesn't change soon, we may have to actually go out and get a job. And he's like, I don't know what I'm qualified to do. And it's a real thing.
Yeah. This is what we do. This is what we know. What do we do now?
It really is something that's going to continue into 2021. I don't know when shows are going to begin again. I mean, all these theaters keep pushing back the dates and, postponing them again. So I don't know. I mean, I have no idea where this is going to go or how this is going to end and, what the long-term effects are for, all music, but rock and roll in particular.
Yeah, me too. And I wish there were an end date, but there's not. So, I don't know. I don't know at this point, but you're right. It's going to be interesting to see 2021. And I have hope that, everybody will get back to it in 2021. We don't even know that yet, but I'm keeping it positive.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, I love doing these podcasts. I love the discussions that I have. I love talking to the newer acts and some of the legacy guys that come on the show too and getting everyone's perspective. Everyone's got their own individual point of view. It's great to hear that. And I think, doing stuff like this and, having rock radio out there, doing what you do, is important for the cause because, rock and roll needs every resource right now it can get. And hopefully fans start listening to new music. I mean, what better time to listen to new music when you're stuck at home?
Right now, 100%. Yeah, exactly. Lots of time. Of course, everybody's working on their own new music right now.
Right, but I'm just talking about the casual fan. I mean, we're having this conversation and people are going to hear it and, they may not have listened to new rock music. Go listen to it. Go listen to it. It's, I mean, you're not going to like everything, but there's plenty of stuff out there that, is for the classic rock fan. Totally.
Yeah. Let's find that new artist that's going to exceed sales of 30, 40 million. There's not many that have done that anyway. But yeah, let's find them.
Well, Marci, it's been great having you on. I love the conversation. Thanks for doing this. Anything you want to promote? Your social media, whatever else you're working on.
Awesome. Come find me. Come. Let's find each other on social at Marci Wiser. It's WISER, MARCIWISER. And yes, you can stream the station anytime. I'm happy to play your favorite rock song, no matter where you live. No problem. Do it all the time. So yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Jay.
I've got a request for you for Monday.
Okay.
Joyous Wolf, Odyssey.
Odyssey?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been playing Mother Rebel.
That's a great song, too. But Odyssey is their new song.
I'll do Odyssey. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll throw it on for you. Yeah. Sure.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Well, thanks again, Marci. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. Come back anytime, and, we'll do this again.
Awesome. Sounds good, Jay. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Well, all right, everybody. Once again, this is Jay Scott. This is the Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Hope everybody enjoyed the episode. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will talk again soon. Thank you.